to the My First Rodeo podcast, the show where we get to talk to really cool, interesting, and famous people about the various firsts on their path to success. Today is no exception. We have Adam Lehman on the show. Adam is the president and CEO of Hillel International, which you may or may not know is the largest Jewish student organization in the world, engaging 200,000 students and 850 colleges and university campuses in the U.S. and 16 other countries. Adam and I are old friends. We started practicing law together at the Skadden Arps firm in D.C., one of the largest firms in the world. At the time, I think we had 2,000 or 3,000 lawyers. I think they're probably double that now, if not more. But Adam was in the corporate group. I was in the regulatory and energy group. And we went in different paths from there for sure, but have stayed in touch. Adam left and was one of the first in-house lawyers, and then became in the business side of what was then America Online. I guess it still is America Online, but if you're above 45 or so, you know that America Online was really the first big .com company. And Adam was there about 8 years and got in and got out at certainly the right times, which put him in a great position for a variety of reasons. One, I'm assuming he did all right, but more importantly, he learned a lot of great things and contributed a lot of great things, and was then part of a lot of entrepreneurial startups. And we had a great conversation today. I learned things about him today that I didn't know. I did not know that he was a playwright that really put together a great deal of plays and scripts, and even produced them in a really short period of time with some degree of success, considering that compressed period of time. You'll learn that he is also an a cappella singer. And, you get to, as I hope, if you've listened to other episodes of the My First Rodeo podcast, you get to learn the humanity of people. Obviously, the position he sits in now as the CEO and president of Hillel International, it's a pretty unique time to be there. He joined that organization, and he joined it just before the pandemic, which certainly for an organization that focuses on college students and college campuses, everybody was impacted for sure. But that constituency and those venues, as much as anybody during the pandemic. And he does some great things. The leadership team does some great things to not only help the organization survive and to serve its students, but really to put it in a new and better place. And of course, the challenges, the conflicts that have reached, I would say, new highs in Israel, at conflict between Israel and Palestine and other constituencies, certainly has reached a new high, and also is playing out, at least on the American side, largely or a lot on college campuses. So again, Hillel International front and center. And this is not a political podcast. This is not a podcast where we explore those issues by design, but we get into a little bit today. But really, I think the point of this conversation, I hope the benefit of the conversation, is just to flesh out one of the humans, Adam Lehman, who's sort of in the midst of that dialogue, that drama, that just disparity. There's so many words that come to mind. But so that you have a face, that you have a person. And what we get into in this conversation is how we've reached a place where people are speaking, especially politicians are speaking or purporting to speak on behalf of groups and constituencies and organizations, and taking positions as if they are doing it because of what they assume another group or constituency that they either are against or for believes, without oftentimes asking or seeking the input of those organizations or those people. And I think Adam is a really gifted person at navigating, excuse me, those issues and those challenges and that dynamic And also, he's in that position. He's in the position where he has to represent an organization that is not a monolith, that is not made up of these hundreds of thousands of people that all think one way. And I think he does a really good job of representing the organization and listening and hearing and approaching it with empathy and with love and with care and with concern and with good humor when that's appropriate and possible. Gifts that I've always noticed in Adam since we were young lawyers, and which again, it's not unique to the Jewish community, but is something that I've always sensed in the best of the people in the Jewish community, and Adam is certainly one of those. So I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. I hope you do. This is me talking to Adam Lehman. Well, man, thanks for taking time to join me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's great to be connecting this way and having the conversation.
It's been a long time, and we started off our careers largely together, but gosh, they've gone different paths. And I've admired you mostly from afar, but occasionally we've gotten to reconnect, and I've really appreciated that.
Yeah, ditto. Big fan of not only the way you've developed your career, but I always tell people the story of your volunteer work with the marathons, going from courthouse to courthouse. It's just mind-boggling.
Well, thanks, man. You've done some pretty unique and innovative things yourself. So we will compare notes. I was reminded, I would say, as I was, usually I don't do a lot of back research, and you'll find that I've not done much here, but I did enough to know that I learned something about you I didn't know, and that is you are a playwright.
Yes, I had this very unusual, almost a sabbatical at one point mid-career where I just started writing, found it to be this very cathartic outlet. And then it turned into an exploration of a whole different little niche industry where I actually not only wrote extensively, but started to get plays produced as part of competitions or at smaller regional theaters. So yeah, fascinating chapter, unintended.
Wow, how did I miss that chapter or forget about it at this age? It could have been the latter, but are you done with that phase of your life, or at least is that part concluded?
Yeah, it was a fascinating period because it ramped so quickly. So this was, just to put it in context, I had been working at AOL for 8 years during the rise and before the fall of AOL, but it was this very intense period as the dot-com era was growing and before the dot-com bubble burst. And so I was just looking for a few months to clear the head before getting into some new entrepreneurial ventures, and just wrote furiously for a couple of years. I went back to work a few months later, but I continued to write early in the morning or late at night. Produced about 40 plays. It was like biblical, like in the 40 days and 40 nights. I produced 40 plays in a pretty short period of time. One acts, short plays, and some full lengths, and then it was gone.
Wow.
So to your question, it's like after a couple of years of all of that intensive writing and working on productions, I got so enmeshed again in a new entrepreneurial venture that, I don't know if it's just that the creative bug had been fully exhausted, or I just had to divert my creative energies elsewhere. But, I do think about maybe at some point later in life getting back to whether it's playwriting or some other fiction-based writing. But I literally have not put that pen to paper in, like almost 20 years.
Oh, that's crazy. So what, generally speaking, was the subject matter of your plays?
Yeah, I mean, because I was writing so much, I hit a lot that was different. I certainly, coming out of my law and business backgrounds, did have some storytelling that was based in those spaces. I had a farce called All Business that actually got some good play. It was um, there was a staged reading at the Kennedy Center, and then parts of it were produced at other theaters,
Crazy.
as well as some more dramatic um, work, focused in those kind of business deal making spaces. But some of my most produced work was actually in the non-reality based, more kind of esoteric philosophy based. I had one play called Interior Rift, and the entire drama is a psychodrama. The characters are all parts of one person's psyche. You can, go through the entire play. It was produced locally here in DC, and look at it at face value as if the characters are people. But as you get further into it, most people, I think, start to understand, no, this is actually some, conflict happening within a person's head.
That's
So, that was fun. And then really a frivolous but super fun version of that too. I was a student of philosophy and really loved both real full-on philosophy, but also artistic, manifestations of that. So one of my favorite plays was Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett.
I was thinking about that when you were describing the first one, even.
Yeah. And in fact, my very first play was built around a similar premise. It was all about like digging, but can't do justice to, the totality of it. But I then wrote a play called Waiting for Godot, but it was about two characters waiting to see a production of Godot. They're in a line waiting for Godot. I used the entire kind of narrative and script of the actual Waiting for Godot to kind of reinvent it with these two characters waiting for a play they never can get in to see.
I love that.
And it was super fun. And it actually also got some nice productions because, again, for people in the industry, they
good for you, man. That's did you contemplate calling it Waiting for Godot, or you like the simplicity?
Exactly. No, and in fact, that probably would have been a better title, because I'm sure, again, when some of the people you submit to saw it, they're like, "This is a joke. What do you mean? There already is Waiting for Godot."
I'm assuming whatever intellectual property rights the original Beckett has have long since expired, and you could actually use the name?
That's a good lawyerly question. The benefit of never really hitting the big time with any of this is I don't think anyone paid attention. Although this one also had a production at the Kennedy Center as part of one of their new play festivals. So you would think that they would have cared or paid attention, but no one ever bothered me. So
that's neat. Well, man, I think that's as we're talking, even as we're sort of starting, not at your first rodeo, but one of your rodeos. I mean, you just jump into things, and I hate it's cliche to say reinvented yourself, because there's a core Adam Lehman in everything that you've done. And you've always, as far as I know, been the same person, but you've taken that person on so many different journeys, and your family along with it.
Yeah. And that's, we all gain self-awareness, I think, as we age, God willing. And for me, I realized that is a fundamental part of who I am. I like to take on new challenges and also operate in different zones where I can apply whatever skills, relationships, perspective I've developed previously in a new environment, and hopefully in a way that adds value for, my community and the world. So that's always been kind of or increasingly the way I've thought about life and career.
Yeah, that's a nice way to look at it. And in terms of creativity in your upbringing, and I know you grew up in Ohio, you had a couple of extraordinary parents. Talk about them and how that influenced, or at least opened you up to some of the other journeys you've taken.
Yeah, it's both a great question and kind of a great territory to interrogate. I feel like it's a therapy session. Tell me about your parents. Grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, in Shaker Heights suburb. And as you said, both my parents, are extraordinary people, driven, very socially conscious and involved. So my dad was a lawyer, spent really the whole first phase of his career as an elected official in Ohio, state representative, and was a real trailblazer in terms of more the progressive end of the political spectrum. This was back in the late 60s and 1970s, and led the charge on everything from gun safety legislation to early iterations of environmental legislation to, trying to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, judicial reform, for the protection of, all people. And it's interesting as we look at how red a state Ohio has become. Back then, there was a strong Democratic Party in Ohio, and he was a key figure during that period. And my mom was also a trailblazer in her own right. She worked as an educator and assistant principal, but then herself decided to go to law school in her 40s and ended up first as a serious women's rights advocate, actually ended up arguing a case in front of the Supreme Court related to reproductive rights, and then became an elected judge in Cuyahoga County. So, I had these role models that demonstrated how you could, continue to improve yourself in terms of learning and skill development and apply that, for the benefit of your community. And, I've certainly tried to do both those things. Now, from we were talking about creativity, my dad was definitely the more down the middle, hard charging lawyer type. My mom had more of the creative streak. And that really bled through to my sister and my brother. My sister ended up starting her career at Second City, and then she became a clown for Wrigley Brothers.
I did not know that.
For several years before she went back to become a doctor. But we have this kind of mean creative streak that it's something all three of us have kind of scratched that itch.
That's interesting. And there's something, I've been exploring this on the podcast, but also just in my own life, because I grew up with two Jewish parents. And I don't know, we'll get into it, but mine was not, a religious Jewish experience, although we went to Reformed services. I was bar mitzvahed, but the Jewish experience for me was the people in the community. And one part of that community, and I always sensed it in you, is just a sense of humor, a joke behind everything, not in a diminishing way, although I certainly overstepped that from time to time. But when I look at you now, and when I picture you when I knew you back when, there's always this countenance of something funny or amusing to say, and then it also crosses over with an empathy or an understanding. Like I'm hearing you, and there's something unifying and funny and all that. And I don't know, did you sense that coming up and helping you form your personality and who you are?
Absolutely. I think you just said on two very core, not only attributes, but survival skills for Jewish people and Jewish communities over time. Humor for sure. And I mean, you look at so many of the comedic greats.
Yeah.
They did come from Jewish backgrounds. And let's face it, it's the classic, if you don't laugh, you're going to cry, right? When communities are put under stress, pressure, forced to self-alienate, often you do look for that outlet, and humor is a great way to do so. I will tell one funny side story. As I mentioned before, like one of my first plays that I wrote, it was a comedy. It was this farce, all business. And I took it to a playwriting forum in DC. And I won't mention the name of the guy so as not to, commit what's known as lashon hara, like, kind of negative gossip. But the person running the group, we did a reading of it in the playwriting group. And, it got some really good laughs and chuckles and whatever. And at the end, the guy who was Jewish running the playwriting group said, no, you can't keep this one going. Jews are not funny.
What?
And I said, what are you talking about? Woody Allen, Mel Brooks. No. Yeah, Jews, you can't do humor. So I thought that was funny, right?
Wow.
Just because it was so ahistorical and off base and coming from this Jewish playwright. But anyway, humor for sure. Up to this day, like I'm watching Hacks. I don't know if you've seen this show. And the younger in the pairing, and Einbinder is Jewish and very self-identified and out, so to speak, Jewishly. But as you also said, empathy, huge. It's one of the things I so value about the Jewish tradition and Jewish present, for all of the ways that Jews over time, over thousands of years, have tried to protect themselves. Built into that ethos has always been a focus on caring for others. Literally in this week's Torah portion, actually, is the kind of classic line of "love your fellow as yourself," and that is not only in some ways the most foundational Jewish ethic. It is, as I'm sure we'll talk about. I now have the privilege of leading an organization called Hillel, and Hillel is based on the teachings of Hillel the Elder. And many people are familiar with both the story where he meets a convert who says, I will become a Jew if you teach me the entire Torah on one foot, while I'm standing on one foot. And the other famous elder, Shammai, threatens to beat him with a stick, the convert, because he says, well, that's insane. There's so much Torah and knowledge that you would need to know. Hillel says, love your neighbor as yourself. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. And so that's, that empathy, that sense of love for others, is just absolutely foundational.
Yeah. And I was talking in just coincidentally in the last episode with Seth Miller about just the great tradition in modern times. And when I say modern, civil rights era forward, like your father obviously was a part of, it seems, of just standing next to other people who don't have a voice or don't have an adequate voice in the moment. And I don't know that history gets told broadly enough.
Yeah. And I think it's also become very confounded in this current era because you've got this bitter, unbelievably painful conflict in Israel, between Israelis and Palestinians. And because, Israel in that context has been so characterized as the oppressor, it is bled through to the notion that actually Jews are not empathetic and, or even worse, are, these killing machines or whatnot. Now, I have a very different view of what's going on in Israel and in the West Bank and Gaza, having been to Israel and the West Bank many times. But I think, to your point of maybe that core commitment to empathy and lifting up the voices and rights of those without a voice or rights, I think sometimes that's getting obfuscated by people's kind of political views as it relates to the Middle East.
Yeah. I mean, that is the history, and it comes from a really important foundational place. How do you balance that in your role and just as a person? Obviously, you have a constituency, but you also still have a heart and eyes, and there's government, there's military, and then there's at its core, I know this is where you come down, people. I mean, so how do you navigate that, recognizing that everybody has their lane, but at the end of the lane is humanity?
Yeah, I think it's complex for all of us, and not just in relation to, in my case, Jewish identity or looking at conflict in the Middle East, but, there's so much conflict and polarization in society in this period. I think, frankly, a lot of people have lost the capacity for empathy or traded it out for, other things to focus on. So in my case, I feel really lucky and blessed that in our work at Hillel, we're able to educate, and we're able to do that in a way that is very focused on building values, building empathy. It also enables, just quick commercial or background. Hillel, we serve about 180,000 students a year on 850 college and university campuses. On the one hand, promoting opportunities for Jewish students to deepen their own identities and learning and connection to the Jewish community, but very much also using Hillel as a platform to do good in their communities and in the world. And so at the end of the day, virtually every student we serve does not have the capacity to dictate global or foreign policy in places like Israel or anywhere else around the world. But they do have the ability to lift up a fellow student. They do have the ability to actually counter polarization on their campus and promote dialogue across difference. And they do have the ability to choose who they want to be based on, as you said, really longstanding traditions of Jewish values. And so personally, for me, like being able to invest in that aspect of the work, is what's critical, even as I also try to make sure, as I look at situations like all the conflict in and around Israel today, that I have my own understanding of it, and that it's based on, fortunately, being able to be in person in those spaces to develop what I think is a much more nuanced view than most people are able to garner.
And certainly then they would assume, given the role that you serve, or given, what they may assume Hillel is about. Do you find that it's difficult to, obviously a big tenet of the work that you do, it's particularly lately, is taking steps to combat anti-Semitism. And for some reason, the world, media, whoever, politicians nowadays seem to put that in you can't combat anti-Semitism and still look at, I'll say, the other side or the other aspects. That seems to me to be a false narrative. How do you look at it?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think you have to both define anti-Semitism and address it from a more universal place, meaning, like with any other particularist identity, ethnic identity, religious identity, um, we want a world where people can fully express those identities without fear of discrimination, harassment, or prejudice. And so that's the work where it intersects, with Israel-related topics, is on the one hand not an intersection around having capacity for diverse views about Israel, Palestinians, or the conflict. In fact, when you get inside the Jewish community, there's incredible diversity of views, including extreme criticism of the current government in Israel, or certain aspects of the conduct of war with Hamas in Gaza. And when you cross the line from criticism of Israel or difference of opinions to demonization of Israel, treating it as an evil enterprise in its core, becoming totally ahistorical and afactual around how we've arrived at this moment, creating extreme double standards, even in looking at the conduct of the war, for example, where just a few days ago, there was some Temple students who went to a bar owned by a well-known Jewish guy who owns Barstool Sports, and wrote "F the Jews" and some other hateful things about Jews. And when asked, well, why? They said, because of Israel. Mm. Well, there you go. Like, now you've totally gone from whatever version of Israel they have in their mind, translating that through to all Jews, which again, that's like pick any ethnic minority, you can't hold them collectively responsible for anything, number one. But number two, again, typically it's based on such a malformed understanding of, this painful conflict. So anyway, long answer, but it's part of what's so important in terms of helping on campus students, administrators understand why there needs to be a line between, extreme criticism of Israel and, again, treating it as the devil's work, basically,
Right.
which is where the line breaks down.
Yeah, when you add the gloss of politics and I don't know, just grandstanding and wrapping yourself around any group or cause. I always thought that the military gets exploited by the political parties. Everybody wants to wrap themselves around veterans, but a lot of times people don't ask the veterans what they think, or the veterans are so appropriately disengaged in the political process that everyone wants to speak for them. And I imagine the Jewish constituency and your members, the students that you represent or serve, they're not one group of people. There are a whole bunch of people, and you've got politicians, for example, claiming that they know how you think and they can speak for you and they need to protect you, or the opposite, that they know how you think and you're the enemy.
Yeah, no, it's such a big point. Like just to give some concrete examples of how this plays out in such painful and unacceptable ways on a campus, we'll have students walking into a Shabbat dinner just to walk in to celebrate Shabbat as part of a community. They're getting, in some cases, yelled at as baby killers and genocidal monsters, literally those words. And no one stops to ask them, what do they think about the situation? And they have incredibly diverse views. And number one, number two, again, these really not simply hyperbolic, but in my view, dangerous characterizations are problematic in and of themselves. But we had a student, I won't name the campus, but who just had a Hillel sticker on her water bottle at a gym and ended up with someone coming accosting and assaulting her.
Mm.
And it just so happens, much like most of the victims of 10/7 in southern Israel, she's a huge peacenik. All she cared about when it came to the Middle East was, how can you broker peace? How can you support the people who are being discriminated against on both sides of the border? But no one cared to ask that. And instead, again, you get to this just classic version of discrimination, and in this case, harassment and assault.
And really get back to the point of empathy, of really, to say the least, a missed opportunity to listen and to hear, and to empathize, and then hopefully solve, because that's where solutions come from, is by listening. And I know that's probably what you have to do, even within the constituency now. I mean, I'm sure you've got people that are much more, again, I hate to say sides because it's way too nuanced to say left or right, but you've got people that within Hillel, maybe people that don't even want to be associated with it because of what, their strong convictions. And then you've got, people on the whole wide spectrum, and you've got to represent all of them.
Exactly. And it's both sometimes it feels like an impossible task, and at other times a really noble one. And it's become, an increasingly large focus of our work. We are bringing facilitators to hundreds of campuses at this point to teach the skills. What does it mean to actually listen and see someone from a different perspective and identity? How do you create space and do it in a way where you can honor your own values and commitments, but also see the humanity in others? What are the really practical ways to do that at a skill level? So we're seeing the opportunity to say, in this moment, not only do we need to walk that walk within our own Jewish community, which, as you said, can be a challenge because you've got some very different camps and views, but then how can we take that to the broader campus where, maybe the latest issue is around Israel, Gaza, Hamas, that whole set of dynamics, but we know more broadly, there are just enormous political divides and cultural divides. So I'm really hopeful that we as a Hillel movement can be a force for good in
Yeah.
terms of breaking down some of those not only divides and misconceptions, but in skill building. So as a society, we all get better at, understanding each other, empathizing, and working together.
Yeah. Even just valuing that as a skill. I mean, it's almost seen as a weakness. I was at an event just last week. I'm on the board of a nonprofit news organization, which in my mind couldn't be any more nonpartisan. I mean, that's the whole nature of nonprofit news is to just be unbiased. All news should be, but obviously a lot of them are not any longer. And we were having an event for lawyers in the community, and a really good lawyer, a good man, came up to me, said, "I need to talk to you privately." It was before the event started, and he said, I see that you're on this board, but I also see that you've been at an event before. I don't even know specific event he was talking about with someone who happens to be a Republican in Congress, a guy I went to college with, who is like you, as a friend, and I'll generally listen to, support, and certainly continue to care for friends, even if I don't necessarily write him a check or what have you. And in his mind, that was just irreconcilable. Like you couldn't even be friends with one of them and then be part of this organization that I think he also probably misperceived. It's not a liberal organization. It's exactly the opposite. But that's so
Yeah,
common.
it is. And you're bringing me back to, again, a common situation that we're trying to deal with on campus where, um, unfortunately, and there's an asymmetry here, but unfortunately, a lot of the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian groups have adopted a mode they call anti-normalization. So they won't even talk to a Jewish student who they see as affiliated with an organization like Hillel that does believe in and support the idea of a Jewish and democratic state of Israel. And so, like from the get-go,
Right.
you've got a recipe for conflict. I've got the son of a neighbor who last year at the encampments went to try to, I think, unfortunately, naively, but have conversations. And he said, like most Jewish students, uh, he said, I believe in a two-state solution, and I want to see progress towards peace. Um, and not only did they refuse to talk, they just started to, again, hurl insults at him as, Zionist baby killer, et cetera. All the epithets that have become so common. And we have to get past that anti-normalization. We have to get past what you saw with your conversation where someone says, just because you have a relationship with this person, therefore we can't even communicate or work together.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if I won him over, but he stuck around. And what I told him is is a lot of things I disagree with that individual about. But I'll tell you this about him: he'll always, time permitting, pick up my phone and when I call. And there's been issues where I think I've been able to enlighten him, and maybe move him a little bit in one direction or the other. And if I'm just like, I'm not talking to you, I'd lose that opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we got a lot serious, and appropriately so. But I know you're not a person to do things lightly. You do everything you do seriously. But I have to imagine when you left, your fourth or fifth or sixth entrepreneurial endeavor, and out of the creative endeavors that we've talked about earlier today, you kind of thought, I don't know, probably not a retirement job, but maybe it'd be, just maybe you could walk into it. And then how far into you being at the helm of Hillel does COVID hit?
Yeah. So COVID hits 2 months after I took on my job as CEO
Mm,
at Hillel. And, Mike Tyson has a great quote about, everyone has a strategy until they get punched in the face.
sure.
That's
Yeah.
that is the story of my start as CEO. I had a grand vision and strategy.
Like a year-long
And
strategic plan, I'm guessing, maybe a
oh
5 year.
yeah, multi-year, and oh my God, lollipops, rainbows. I mean, it was going to be
Yeah.
incredible. And 3 months later, I'm dealing with 1,200 Hill professionals who themselves, in many cases, are dealing with illness or family members who are beginning to be impacted, campuses shuttering left and right. Our whole premise, we're very kind of countercultural in that we do have a lot of digital offerings, but we're still very much believers in in-person relationship building and community building. How do you do that when the entire university world shuts down? So yeah, that was quite an introduction to getting hit in the face and having to try something different.
Yeah, and I mean, how do you navigate that? I always think of people at the helm of something so important and so impactful, and to some extent, fighting for, I assume, survival or figuring out what survival looks like in that period of time. We didn't know how long it was going to be, but also caring for your family, caring, about your extended family and so forth. That's got to be a time.
It was insane. But I mean, like most difficult periods, such an opportunity for kind of growth and innovation. On the one hand, like on the downside, like many people, I was, just Zoom obsessed for, 16 hours a day. So you have a perpetual headache and bleary eyes and
Yeah.
the whole deal. On the other hand, man, did we create some cool stuff. Like one thing that was fun is heading into the high holidays, which are kind of the big um, ritual moment for the Jewish year with the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Um, for the really one of the only times in Jewish history, you had this moment where people were not going to be able to actually come together to celebrate these, rituals that go back 3,000 years. And so we said, what can we do about that? And particularly for our audience. So we created something called Higher Holidays. Now, being a campus organization, people can misinterpret that. But for us, it meant coming up with a fully digital experience that drew on the fact we have hundreds of amazing rabbis and Jewish educators who are charismatic and have unique approaches to how they celebrate holidays. Everything from very traditional to yoga and meditation based Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So we put together this very diverse. We had Jewish comedians too. We had a whole comedy track for the holiday. I like to say we built the largest Jewish congregation in Jewish history in a period of a month. So I think we had 50,000 people participate in these services. So it was really cool and representative of what we tried to do throughout that whole crazy COVID stretch.
What I mean, I'm sure lots of things, but you're problem solving, you're managing people, you're dealing with crisis management. What do you draw on up to that point in time? Because you hadn't run a nonprofit organization before, you've done a lot of things. So, what in your upbringing and your prior corporate experience do you draw on in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all just have to play to whatever strengths we have. And particularly in that kind of context, it becomes almost instinctual. Like you can't overthink it. You have to you lean in crisis on where your kind of heart and soul take you. So for me, we definitely pushed into the creative space, like we were talking about before with the playwriting. I tried to just be as imaginative as I could on the one hand, and on the other hand, really support my team in the same. I mean, I was surrounded by, fortunately, colleagues who, when you give them a sense of permission to try things that are really different, they'll often surprise you in positive ways, coming up with cool stuff. And what an incredible opportunity as a leader to not only support them in creative thinking, but then this is another thing where then the business background came into play. I could also think a little more strategically at a financial level and say, okay, I know there's financial risk in this moment, but looking across all the different assets we have and thinking long term around what we can build, sure, we don't have that $300,000 to create higher holidays, but I'm going to green light it, and we'll go find a forward-thinking foundation to support it. But we're going to take that risk now. So that ability really helped me too. If I'd come in having not lived through so many ups and downs in the business world, I might have been more frozen around, oh my God, we don't have the money. How can we do any of these things? But instead, I said, no, like we can take some risk, and you kind of learn how to figure that out.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. It's there, there's so many things that we all have in whatever space we're in that are remnants of that period of time. And some of them we bemoan, and then others are good. Are there innovations or just ways you do business now that are forever changed in a positive way because of things you did and created in the pandemic?
Absolutely. Several. I mean, first of all, just our team at the Hill International level, we increasingly moved to a remote staff structure. And that means that we now staff around the world. And we got really good at how to not only operate, but operate effectively, in a remote and digital framework. So, and it means that, we've got amazing people in Austin and San Francisco and LA and Boston and Jerusalem and even in parts of Asia now. So it really has been extraordinary at that level and continued through. At a programmatic level, we've continued to use digital to complement what we do on an in-person basis. So, we have something called the service engagement internship, where we have community service leaders on, several hundred campuses. We not only have them organizing their activities locally, but then we can convene them on a monthly basis in digital space. Same with our Israel Leadership Network. Same with even our Jewish Learning Fellowship, where historically we would have only been able to convene students in a physical space at University of Florida or UCLA or MIT or pick your school. In COVID, we realized, wow, we have Jewish students who want to learn, and they're at University of Northern Florida or a really small school in Arizona that doesn't have a Hillel.
Right.
Now they can join digitally and be a part of a community and cohort. So all of that has continued. And if anything, we're trying to figure out how to keep growing, those cross-cutting communities. Because one of the cool things about Jewish community is it is based on this notion of global peoplehood. You have, Jewish people can feel affinity to, a community that does span the globe. And so those post-COVID digital experiences make that even easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, part of your lived experience, your backstory, and I love that we're 42 minutes into a conversation, and this is what I love about Adam Lehman. He's not dropped his Ivy League pedigree. That's very unusual. Usually, that's sort of a front end thing for most of you Ivy Leaguers. But joking aside, obviously the elite schools and schools in general find themselves in a time of unique, I'll say, crisis, and certainly trying to figure out what path to take to, let's say, appease current political demands. That's got to affect you both as someone who spent time at Dartmouth and Harvard, and then also who has students that are at those schools and others that are affected, and really all schools are affected in a way.
Yeah, man, has been a tricky period.
Yeah.
And if we look at the Ivy League schools and kind of Ivy plus, I think the first thing you have to do is recognize there's incredible diversity in the higher ed ecosystem. And so even my two alma maters, Dartmouth and Harvard, have gone down two very different paths. Dartmouth has actually fared pretty well. And I don't think that's accidental. I think, under their current president, President Blylock, from literally day one after 10/7, they had faculty coming from Jewish and Muslim backgrounds co-teaching courses on what was developing, what had happened with the atrocities of 10/7, where things were going from there. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they became required for students to participate in some course or discussion group. So there just immediately was this approach of let's do what we should do best, educate and require a civil approach to how we relate to one another. Now, there's been protest activity at Dartmouth. And by the way, like at Hillel and personally, I'm a big supporter of free speech and protest, but there is a notion of time, place, and manner restrictions, and that should be applied so that those activities don't deprive other students of their ability to go to class, to study in the library, to live their lives. And so, again, at Dartmouth, when protests crossed those lines, they took clear action. Harvard, I think people unfortunately are familiar with the opposite side of that story. And now you then, as you alluded to before, have enormous political pressure coming to bear. And that's complicated too, because on the one hand, there definitely are Jewish students who, and Israeli students in particular at Harvard, who have just clearly been subjected to pretty outrageous discrimination and harassment. And so they deserve protection under civil rights law. And so that can and should be applied. When you get into opining on whether it's legitimate for the government to take the steps that they've taken with Harvard, that's to use the technical Jewish term, I mean, that has lots of implications. On the one hand, I speak to people who support those tactics and will point out we've seen faster response and change at some of these schools by virtue of aggressive intervention. And then you look at the other side of this and say, Jewish students and organizations have not been suggesting that 501c3 status should be pulled or that research grants should be pulled. I mean, that's a totally different league and frankly has very little to do with, with our community or issues. There's a bigger, I think, drama playing out there. So it does put us in a difficult position. But at the end of the day, we will keep doing what we do best, which is supporting Jewish students. And we will also, as Hillel, I mean, there are different organizations in our Jewish community who play different roles, but we're about fixing higher education and building them up. We don't want to see institutions destroyed. So in the long term, however politics play out here, we're going to be their partner with administrations to make sure they do have good policies, they do build healthy cultures on campus. And unlike most people who you see comment on this, I actually am pretty optimistic. I know we've worked so well with so many universities, and they're not in the headlines, right? But fortunately, there are a lot of schools that are getting this right, and they're not only Jewish students, but all their students benefit from that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another example, it seems to me, where one could say that you've got people doing things in the name of protecting, I don't want to say your constituency because it's not uniquely yours or even Hillel's, but it happens to be a constituency you represent without perhaps seeking, what do you guys actually think we should do here? And that's never a healthy thing.
Yeah. And what makes it harder is it's really a mix because what I don't appreciate when sometimes people will look at this current context and say, it's, a total manipulation politically to invoke anti-Semitism. Well, no, it's not a total manipulation in the sense that there really has been very demonstrable and unacceptable, forms of anti-Semitism playing out on many of these campuses. So there are issues and they need to be addressed. And some of the interventions are really well tuned to that and targeted to that. But I will look forward to a future where, hopefully some of the political dimensions of this settle in a way where we can stay focused on, as I said, the fix and the build part, not only at elite institutions, but really across higher ed.
Yeah, no, I love that about you and your approach to things and your team's approach to things. I can't let you go without talking about a cappella. You are a member of a cappella group, happens to be a group of Jewish people. Tell us the name.
Yeah, jukebox. So Jewkvox. So one of the things about Jewish a cappella is you have to have a hokey, punny name.
Okay,
So like
seems right.
jukebox, but in our case, we use vox instead of box, Latin for voice. And then to make it even hokier, we say we're the only certified kosher a cappella group. So the K, we put a circle around it in the middle. So it's beyond, to call it like a dad joke
Yeah.
isn't dad jokes. I mean, it's really bad.
But it's got an intellectual quality as well. I like it on all fronts.
Yeah. But it's fun. I sang a cappella in college and I've always enjoyed singing. And back to what you said about, certain niche things that get uh, a lot of energy within the Jewish community. Yeah, music has always been, part of Jewish culture, and Jewish a cappella has become this thing. It's like we have our own little pitch perfect going on. So actually, I put a thumb on the scale this past year to have us sponsor a Jewish a cappella competition that we held at College Park. I mean, there are like 100 Jewish a cappella groups all doing shticky, punny,
Wow.
Fun stuff. And like with my group Jukebox, we'll do some things where it will be almost liturgical, but then we also just do straight secular, fun music as well. So it's a good diversion.
And you've had some pretty cool opportunities. I know I saw at least one video of you all singing before a national, an NBA game, a basketball game.
Yeah, well, actually, it was Nats Park. It was so we've done some major baseball games. We're trying to get into the Wizards. So
Okay.
if anyone in their organization is listening, but we've done that. We've performed at the Verizon Center and the White House. All that said, we've never, we've not had NBA, NFL. Those venues we tend to do the national anthem. We have a really fun version of that. While it sounds like, they're doing big stuff, most of what we do are like bar and bar mitzvahs. So, we become a little bit of entertainment out on the old people singing.
I love that. I don't want to say you don't take yourself too seriously, but sometimes people see me doing, practicing law and handling serious cases and then going and telling, jokes at the comedy clubs on the weekends. And you're like, how do you reconcile those two brands? And I'm like, they're both me. They're just different facets of who I am. And I imagine that's what you bring to it as well.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And I think, Michael, you and I kind of share that not only capacity to live at those extremes and operate that way, but I think we both really enjoy being able to stretch and show up in those different spaces. And you're kind of my hero on that because I've got like on my iPhone a list of jokes for when I finally get around to doing a stand-up routine. That's one of, it's like in life, there was some great, I think it's a Persian aphorism, but, like everyone should in their life, plant a tree, have a child, write a book, something like that. And so on my list of those things, I still want to do a stand-up routine and write a great song. So
you're all over it. I mean, you've tiptoed around it. Now I've learned you have a sister who was at Second City TV. Yeah, when you're ready. I mean, you don't need me to invite you in, but it's fun. I will say, I mean, part of I think our common experience is not aiming for failure, but not being afraid of failure. And comedy is very much that because you get up there, and especially when you're new at it. But that's how it started for me. Is just writing some jokes on my phone. I did it for 6 or 7 years, and then did a workshop and took it from there. So you're more than primed, especially with being a playwright and everything else.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Yeah, next time we talk, I'll tell you if I finally took the plunge. And I'll give a plug, just a shout out. I do a lot of events. We have campus events, donor events, community events. So just this week alone, I saw 2 Jewish comedians who were both like phenomenal. One guy was, his name is Elon Gold, and the other is a guy named Alex Edelman. But back to what we were talking about with that tradition of comedy and joke telling within the Jewish community. It was so fun to see both these guys. And, we talked a little bit about humility. Like I can see how hard it is to pull off stand up even for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Elon Gold was up there for an hour.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So it was really,
Yeah, it's a high wire act for sure. I'm not saying I always do it well, but I'm always on the high wire. And sometimes I fall off without a mat, and other times it goes really well. And like anything else, like singing or writing a song or doing a play, it's the wins that keep you coming back.
amen. Amen.
Well, keep on swinging in all the amazing ways that you do. And I know you're going to continue to have wins, and grateful to have known you for, I think, like 35 years now, and to continue our friendship. And thanks for sharing it on the podcast.
Yeah, been my pleasure. And look forward to seeing you down in Florida sometime soon.
Absolutely, brother. Thanks. Well, there you have it. That's Adam Lehman, the guy who I met many years ago in the I'll say the early '90s, and have known people who you grow an affinity towards, and then you see them in and out of your life various periods of time, never really out, but sometimes more present than others. And then, of course, social media helps for you to have some familiarity and to remember, oh, yeah, that guy. And then, of course, when they take on important roles and they're in important positions like Adam is in and has been in, you get to follow their careers and admire them and root for them and wonder how they're doing with certain issues. And then, to have the opportunity to speak with him in this way, and also to introduce him to people that don't know him, that follow this podcast, or that stumble onto this podcast and get to hear him. And I also hope that the people who are part of Hillel's sphere of influence, who are part of Adam's sphere of influence, who listen to this podcast and this interview of Adam in particular, get to know him in a different way, because he really is an extraordinary person. And I guess that's one of the gifts of sitting in the seat I do is, again, my goal is not to support or antagonize or do any of those things, but just to create opportunities to listen. And, at its root, there are real people involved in real conflicts and real challenges and real circumstances. And with all the grandstanding from a political standpoint, all the silos that we've gotten ourselves into, I think it's important to remember that there are real humans. There are, many more real humans who I hope to talk to in the future. But this was one. This was one who happens to sit in a really important seat and approaches it with a sense of seriousness, and also a sense of humility and a sense of love and a sense of empathy, and whatever observations you make, whatever judgments you make, they're at least as valid as mine. But that's the guy I know. That's Adam Lehman. If you are new to the podcast, I hope you've enjoyed it. I think you would enjoy, if you enjoyed this episode, listening to episode 40, just a couple episodes earlier, where we talked to Seth Miller, who is the head of the Innocence Project of Florida, and just a similar spirit of service, also a similar identity in the sense that they both come from the Jewish community. And I think, in my mind, they represent the best of what's part of humanity in general, and the best of the things that I've always loved and admired from people that I've encountered in the Jewish community and in my own upbringing, which was, as I've said before, Jewish, but, not really religious, certainly not Orthodox, but there's a certain just common denominator of the people that my parents exposed me to or that I met along the way that I just really love. And when I meet another one of them, like Adam or like Seth, my heart's just immediately warmed. Again, not you. It's not exclusive to that culture, but there is something beautiful in the way that the best of that culture represents those qualities. I'd also commend to you episode 18, just for this reason. That's Jim Tanner, who at the time was one of the most successful sports agents in the country. Since then, he's actually taken on the role as the general manager of the North Carolina college basketball team. But Jim and Adam and I all started at the Skadden Arps law firm together. Adam and Jim actually worked as corporate lawyers there before Jim went on his way to become a sports agent. Adam moved to America Online, and I moved to be maybe a slightly bigger fish in a much smaller pond to practice law in Jacksonville, Florida. But I hope you'll agree it's fun to remember the people that you started with, and to follow them, and to stay in touch. It's I don't know. There's just certain people, and I'm blessed to have a lot of them. A number of them I've been able to interview on this podcast because they're just interesting, extraordinary, and in some cases, like Adam and Jim, famous people. There's just you get right back to where you were. There's a certain immediate trust and a credibility and a warmth that comes from keeping friends and seeing how they grow and supporting them, and praying for them, or whatever it is you do to stay connected with people, and to the people that I like. I don't know, the best. The people that I tend to love being around are the ones that have kept and accumulated other friends, but kept really good people in their life, and I'm blessed to have a lot of those, and in some cases to be that to other people. So. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of the My First Rodeo podcast. I hope you'll subscribe. I hope you'll share this episode with other people. And I hope you'll come back and join us next time on My First Rodeo. My First Rodeo.